Hi, I recently watched a tutorial on how to render colour into a grey ball based on the scene behind it and thinking about bounce light basically and the general lighting of a scene. So what I've created is just a circle, and this is defined with a fill layer and a mask, and I've created two balls, just that method. So to find that, it's just solid colour. Choose whatever colour you want. I've gone for a mid grey and then masked it with the previous selection. So select and then solid colour. You got your base colour there. Alright, in fact, let's keep that there. It might be useful to show a transition between the two scenes. So what I'm going to do is start with this one on the right and make a new layer and right click and create a clipping mask. That means it's only going to show painting wherever there's actual pixels that are not transparent below it, or different levels of transparency. So I'll pick a few colours from the scene. Now obviously if I start to paint this ball, this colour here, it kind of disappears and it doesn't make much sense. I'm going to change the brush so it doesn't get smaller. I also want to change it so that the pressure affects that. Right, so I can start to pick some colours and think, okay, some of this colour is going to transfer onto this one, some here, and so on. I'm going to do a little bit less opacity. And you might be thinking, okay, some of the trees might reflect off this, it might be in shadow, but really we should think about how the light is coming from above here. Now you can see this light source is quite warm. I'm going to bring some of that in, but you can also see how some of that light is actually touching the ground here, so I have this shade. So just think about where this lives and how much light's affecting it and whereabouts. So I'll bring a bit of that in, using a nice big soft brush, because this ball technically doesn't have any texture to it just yet. I'm just going to pick some of these tones and use them for a little bit of coarse shadow and give it that kind of roundedness feel. So a way to do that is just make sure you kind of do these kind of arcs and think about the general direction as it goes towards each side. You're kind of making these arcs that are gradually arcing to the shape of the ball. Right, so this was a little bit more feeling like it's in the scene, not completely. So some of this will be in shadow, so there's some shadowy tones here. But also it'll be picking up a little bit of the bounce light hitting the ground, and we can maybe see if there's any reference of that here. Now I see a lot of shadow happening there, so I'm going to use some of that. Maybe some of these dark tones here will help. I'm just repicking some softer parts. I want to soften that a bit. Alright, like so, and you see this light source isn't really getting through anywhere here, but I can imagine it's coming from above, and because it's not affecting the ground here, it's not really getting through all that much. But I'll just put a little tiny hint of it in. This ball suddenly feels a bit more like it's part of that scene. It does need some sort of ground shadow, so I'll do that in a second. I do want to add a bit of texture to it, so I'm going to go for a different brush. I do have a whole bunch of brushes that I bought that are really nice for adding a bit of texture, so I have a bit of that. I'm just sampling the colours now that I've already laid down, so they're a good base. So think of it as me using a big wide spray here, like an airbrush, and then going over it with a little bit more texture. Pick a little bit of this colour. The brush is quite big, so I'm going to reduce that a bit. Okay, I'm going to pick some of this that is becoming a bit of a snowball, and these textures will really help that. So you see I'm changing the textures quite a lot so that I get multiple layers of detail and things, and not just the same thing. Right, so it feels a wee bit more believable. More texture here and there. And now what I'm going to do is just going to add a layer just above, or below actually, to make a shadow. So I'll pick some of this and I'll just bring in a bit of tone. This is going to be a soft shadow, like back here, because the light's all getting scattered and diffused, and there's no strong direct light. That seems to be happening back there, but it's obviously blocked with all these trees. You can't see any of it hitting the ground, so we wouldn't have much here. So we do get a little bit of softer shadow from the cloud, very diffused light, very kind of washed out light source. Just add a bit like that. I can change this to multiply so that it keeps some of the detail below, but it's too strong, so I'll bring back the opacity. I'm going to switch up to a softer brush and just help that a bit. And then I go back to the ball here and just use the same tone. I just want to kind of ground this a bit more. Let's go back to some texture. Now this ball is a bit too perfect, so what I can do is go to the mask and work in black and full opacity. So I'll bring the opacity all the way up, get a nice texture brush, and I'm just going to go round the edge a bit just to change it from being a perfect circle to something a bit more rough. So I'll keep all that detail there because I'm only affecting the mask itself. I can make this feel and look a bit more irregular, which will help it feel like part of the scene. And so it's a good exercise to try get you into using localized colors and using what's there already. You can mess around a bit as well, you know, make some silly shapes out of this, as long as it's not too perfect. You have to think this has kind of been pushed around, maybe it's a big giant snowball like that. And I think now that I've done that, I'm going to go back to this layer and just help the edges to feel a wee bit more alive. So just a little bit touching the edge there, and here. And pick a few colours and tone it back if I feel it's too strong. Maybe a few brighter tones like there. And gradually I'll get a feel for it looking and feeling more realistic. The more little layers of detail that I add. So it's a good set of brushes that I found online from ArtStation. I think they are called realistic drawing brushes or crayon brushes from Maddie Belwart. Illustration brushes maybe. And yeah, so I'm just bringing that in. And I think there's a little bit of subsurface scattering as well, which means when light hits the surface it kind of gets through to the middle of it and maybe even passes through to the other side. So adding a little bit of that will help. I'm going to add a little tiny bit of the highlights here to help it glisten a bit more as well. And I'm just going to deliberately go for a darker tone using the palette up here. Try to stay away from too much saturation, it will really make it a bit weird and won't sit nice. Okay, so that feels pretty cool to me. Feels like it could potentially be there, kind of realistic. Maybe I can use levels, so Control L, just to see if I can unify it a little bit more. Does it feel better if I tone that down? Does it feel better if I bring this up? Okay, and I just do undo and redo. Yeah, quite like that. Okay, there's a few things that I don't like about it, so I'll just pick that colour there. I just want to tickle that edge a bit. Don't like how bright it was. And go back to the mask and get rid of some of the that's the wrong one, with this one. Just get rid of some of the perfectness of that edge. Right, there's other things we can do. If we alt click, we can look at the mask. You can see it's maybe a bit too weird at the edges, so I can pick a little bit and then come back. Alright, so let's have a look at this one. So same idea. I'm going to make a new layer, right click and create clipping mask, and start to pick some of the local tones. Big soft brush to begin with. This makes it easier. And let's set it on the grass here, so we pick up some of the green tones, because this is going to bounce off and mix with the base colour, which is this grey tone, and a little bit the pathway as well. So I'll just bring it back a bit by choosing the grey tone again and just going over with a low opacity. It depends how shiny the object is and what kind of texture you're trying to make. I can always try and make these look shinier later, but I'm making something that sort of matches the scene. Right, and obviously we can't just pick green here and start to layer it in, because it doesn't make sense. This sphere is actually, if you think about how, what direction that it's looking in. So if I make a new layer to explain, just get a smaller brush and think about this point here as pointing directly up to the sky. This point here is coming towards the viewer. This point here is pointing somewhere over to the sky as well, and this here pointing to the ground, as well as a few other parts. This kind of pointing to that part, and so on. So if it's above this horizontal line, it's looking more to the sky, and below it's looking more to the ground. I'm just going to get rid of that layer. Back to this one, pick my colours and just carry on with that. So make it a little splotchy. You can imagine there's more grass over here getting reflected onto this, and start to pick some of the sky colour, and that's getting sort of mixed in there like that. So maybe this is picking up some of that green from far away, and some of the sky over here is getting got to the edge, as well as over here. It's not reflecting this tree, so we don't just grab black and go like that, because it doesn't make sense. This is nowhere near the tree, and it's going to be seeing the sky. If we imagine this is a big open environment. Right, a little bit of this and that. Now, there's no obvious shadows like being cast from a direct light source. It just looks like ambient shadows from the sky. So let's go ahead and add a layer below that. And I can turn off the clipping mask. We don't need clipping mask. Oh, let's do that here actually. That's what I meant to do. Yeah. And now I'm going to just bring in a shadow just to help a bit. So I'm just using black and nice big soft brush. You can see I'm starting to make this more like the soft shadow that's coming from the tree, and just bit by bit bring that in like this, and suddenly it feels already grounded, part of the scene. Now what's going to happen is our bounce light in the ground is actually going to pick up some of that shadow, so we can darken this as well, and it's in shade. So not only is it in shade, but it's also reflecting the darker tone of the ground, so we darken some of this part as well. Again, it depends on the material, what we're trying to make. So I'm going to go with that and start to bring in some texture and decide what I want this to be. It could just be some sort of fuzzy ball. Right, so picking some of those greens just to help that. A bit more of the sky tones up here. Maybe I'll make it like a stony ball, right? So if this is a stony ball, we're going to have a lot of like little dark pits and little light pits. So I'll make sure I change the brush so that I don't get exactly the same texture. Go for something light and knock a few of those marks in. I have to make sure they work visually in terms of their brightness. I don't want them to be too in your face. So subtle is better because your eyes are sensitive enough to pick it up, and when you really look at a rock or a stone, you can see it's just all little subtle deviations in colour and things. This is gradually feeling a bit more like it's there, like it's part of the picture, and my brain's sort of telling me that it's supposed to be there. So just gradually working some of that in, and it's a bit of a perfect ball again. So there's a couple of ways we can make this feel a bit more rough. If we go alt click on the mask and let's go to filter gallery, we'll do a tiny bit of spatter, bring the radius right down. See how it's got a kind of rougher edge to it, and then say OK, and then do a filter blur, Gaussian blur, and just a tiny bit just to help that spatter there, and then just levels adjust it. We're going to levels adjust with Control L just to tighten that up so that we get black and white as opposed to too many grey levels. Right, so we just want to roughen that up like that. Now when we come back out, we've got a lot more of a rougher look. For me, it's a bit too rough, so I was going to go and use the blur again. You see it looks out of focus now. That's another thing though, like, is to try and match the focus of the scene. You can see me doing that. It kind of helped me. If I change that even more, it makes the focus on the trees stronger. Just want to do that, and then Control L. I'm actually working on the mask, but without alt clicking on it. And just tighten that up a bit like that. Let's give it a bit more of a rougher look. Right, so I'll go back to the colour layer and let's pick a little bit more tones up here. I'm just staying away from the edges. I don't want too much of the, a highlighted edge or anything like that, but you can experiment. See, it's kind of reflecting that dark area, but again, it's also in shade, which is nice. Let's make a bigger brush and just stamp some of that down. Some brushes may work better than others, some might not work at all. Right, it kind of feels like it's part of the scene. Now looking back at this one, I don't think it works so well, so I'm just going to revisit to see what I can make work. I'm just going to darken this area, so I'm going to switch my brush mode to multiply to darken some of this stuff here. I want to ground it a little bit better. And go back to normal. Maybe there's a bit of a story told with this that has been rolled and it's made these kind of tracks or something. I'm not too sure. maybe it's became quite frosty sitting there, so it's got some frosty cracks and things happening as well. I do have some frosty brushes somewhere. I don't think they're in this pack though. Right, that's good enough. Now let's have a look at this and think about what I'm trying to make here. So I'm just going to add a blank layer first. Create a clipping mask. And yeah, then start working on colour. So I'm going to pick a little bit of the sky here. Let's pick some of this yellow over here. As if to say it's picking up some of the light. But you see it's kind of like picking up from perhaps the wrong direction because of the way the shadows are being cast. It feels like the light's coming from the left. So, and because it's not part of that scene, doesn't make much sense. But what I'm doing is just a bit of an experiment. Right, picking up some of the black from the trees. And I'm picking up some green from the trees there. Now none of this makes any sense, right? But this is what you might do from the start, and then you'd be like, okay, that's it. I picked up the local colours and put them in there. You know, and something like that, and that's it. Bob's your uncle. So it's not that simple. We have to think about where this is in space, how far back it is, and you know, what else can it see. So it doesn't work well between the two scenes. That's the first thing. Trying to make this work for two scenes is just a bit silly. So I'm just going to move that whole section around. You can see, where does it work best? Kind of works best here. I'm going to move this as if it was an object away back here, because I want to make this feel like it lives back there and ties in with the scene. Right, so same idea, just working on that. I pick some colours, and I want it to pick up a lot of that light the way everything else is, these goldy tones. Now I should start with the soft brush because the texture brushes aren't giving me enough coverage. So I'm going to go up to the soft round brush again, start to bring that in. You can see already I'm getting some results. Bounce light, remember picking up some of the reflection and various tones from different places. See, that already starts to feel like it's supposed to be there, it's just missing the ground. So I'll just pick some of this because that's already a shadow being cast by something else. I'll just bring that in below. I'm going to change this mode to multiply so it darkens below it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, like that, and yeah, that already feels pretty cool. And because it's quite far away, it's going to be out of focus, so I'll go to the mask and I'll do a little bit of blur, or blur, Gaussian blur, and let's bring this up a bit. You can see if it's too much, it's just going to really look fuzzy and washed out. So just a little bit like that, and then I can go back to the clip and play with the texture. Whether I see the texture from that distance, well, it's up to you. There's a little kind of scattery colour brush that I made. It's quite nice to bring that in. And change that to additive. And there we go. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd love to see what you make. Thanks for watching. Bye.